So see, in this stream, I'm gonna do something uh, different. Like, instead of like working, so we're gonna talk about React query. So yes, open dashboard. Okay. So I want to talk about one of the core things that I used for uh, for the API side of things within my app. So let me just explain. So I think data can be divided into two things. One is the API data, which we get from all the API calls, and next is the com component data. So that is like data for, let's say, models and all. So this has nothing to do with API side, uh, and but this is basically what we get from the API. So for example, all this bookmarks that you see over here and all the collections that you see over here, they are all the data that the backend gives us, that the database gives us. So all the data is managed differently, and all the component data is managed differently. So this I will go into later, but this one, how I am managing all the API data, is that I'm using something called, just a minute. Yeah, so I'm using something known as React query. So this is what I am using uh, to basically make my API calls and also manage the API state. So I'll just go into a brief of how this is integrated within the app, and maybe I'll go into much more detail on another stream if uh, this is actually useful, if people find this useful. So, yep. So let's take one example. Let's say I am fetching. No, let's go into fetching the bookmarks. So how do I fetch the bookmark? So let me go into my main dashboard. This is the main heart of everything. So in React query, there are two things. We need to fetch data, update data, and then get the fetched data, right? So in order to fetch all the bookmarks data, we use something called use query from React query. So I'll just show you an example how this is integrated. So if I go to my dashboard index, so I have this section which has all the React queries, and then I have so over here there will be so this use paginated bookmark is my custom hook, which will basically get all the bookmarks data. So if I go into this custom hook, so I'm calling all the get methods to fetch the APIs in this dashboard .js file, because that is like the heart of the entire application. So once we go into my custom hook, you can see the so this uses another thing. This uses use infinite query, which is super similar to use query, but it's a paginated version of the use query. So let me actually go into another example, which is much more simpler. So let's go into categories. So this is a custom hook that basically fetches the category. And the reason why I wrote a custom hook is because we can add all additional configurations within this hook. So it gives another layer of simplicity instead of using this directly. So using a custom hook, it's much more cleaner to call. So if this hook wasn't present here, I need to basically have this over here. But with a custom hook, I can basically customize this. I can add additional logic over here. Any logic that goes before calling the API, I can do it over here, which is a much more cleaner version of calling the API to get the categories data. So this right here is the use query hook. So the use query hook returns the data that the API gives, and it basically accepts two parameters. First parameter is a set of keys. The second parameter is the function itself. So first we'll go into the second parameter, which is basically easier to explain. So the second parameter is just the Axios API call that calls the API. So if you can see over here, there is the Axios post request, and this is the API endpoint, and this is the payload, which basically what you need to send so that the API gives the data that you need. So that is all it is. So this is just an Axios call to get data. So this function is basically the Axios API call, and this right here are the keys that basically uh, uh, use query uses to store this data. So this category key is basically a string that says category, and this is the user ID for the logged in user. So this basically stores, so whatever categories I fetches, React query stores it as categories, comma, user ID. So I'll show you all these. So once you integrate a React query within your app, you can also enable React query DevTools, which is this icon over here, which only enables on development mode. So when I open this, so you can see I have a bunch of queries. This right here is the use query for this particular get data. So category key is categories and user ID. So if you can see categories, and this is the user ID, and this is how React query basically stores the data. The API call, whatever this API call gave, whatever data this gave, it is stored as this. It basically stored as this, and this you can actually imagine it as a pointer to the data source. So within this, you have all my categories. You have bird, which is the first category right here. See, bird. So query keys are like pointers to the data source. And in order to fetch this data, all I have to do is, let me go to an example, maybe layout. Yep. So I can use query client from React query. So query client is another hook that React query gives. Dot get query data, and all I need to do is pass in the key. So what the keys, categories, and user ID, which is logged in user ID. So this equals to this. So once I pass in the key, React query auto. So this is like the React query store. If I just use query client, get data, and pass in the keys, I get whatever the key gives. So I get all this data, and this is stored as category data, and I can use this anywhere throughout the app. So it makes managing server-side data very simple. And similar to React query, there's a bunch of other things like I think SWR, I think, or something, but I think everything is basically the same as what React query does. So the thing is, so let's say I need to uh, update this API call. I need to call this again. In order to call this again, all I need to do is if I basically change. So let's say instead of user ID, I have some custom ID which comes from somewhere, which basically maybe I pass it within the hook. So if any of these keys change, React query will automatically get the call this API again. So if I need to basically call this API again, all I have to do is update the key, which can be updated. So this is again a custom hook. It is better. So I can basically add a new parameter called new key, and if this key is updated and I pass new key over here, if this key is updated, React will automatically make the API call, and when the automatic API call happens, this data will be updated. And then when this data is updated, anywhere I got the data from the React query client store like this will automatically be updated. So it makes handling API data super, 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 super simple, and much more cleaner and easier to use. It makes using the app uh, super easy. So that is how I'm basically managing all my API calls within this app, and all the API calls are over here. So that is how I manage the app. And uh, in order to update data, so this is, we covered fetch data, we covered this, we covered fetching data, and then next updating data. For updating data, there is something called use mutation, which is super similar to use query. So this is a example for use mutation. So let me go to a simple example, maybe. Nope, nope, tag mutation. Yep, this is a simple example. So use mutation is super similar to uh, use query, but instead of query keys, this is the payload. Whatever payload needs to be sent. Sorry, this is not the payload. This is the Access API call. So if you go inside this, the Access API call is there. And then where is that? Yeah. And then the second parameter is on success, what query keys should this update. So once you make the API call over here, let's say this is this I need to basically update this data that is pointed out to this key. So all I'll do is I just need to add the access function here, and on success I just need to pass in these two keys over here. So this is for tags key, but if it's category, all I need to do is pass in these two keys, and React will automatically update this data, and I can get this data, and very similar, and getting the data is same as this. So once the key is updated, then we get the data updated over here as well. So, yep, that is a brief summary of how I update and get data in this app using React Query, which makes development super easy and super clean. So it's pretty, again, simple using React Query for making API calls and managing API calls. Instead of having all the API data in some global store like Redux, using patterns that React Query gives and something similar to React Query is much, much, much more simple. So, yep, I think if you found this particular video useful, and maybe if something is in more confusion, I can maybe make another stream or video that basically goes into detail. Uh, where is that? Yeah, basically going into this, basically going use query into detail, use mutation into detail. So maybe that based on that, maybe if there's a requirement, I'll make a video going into the topics in detail. But yep, that is how I'm managing API calls in this video. So a different type of stream today, just explaining stuff, I think, much less of coding. So yep, that's it for this video, guys. Thank you for watching. I'll see you in the next one.